Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Equality Wins, Understanding Your Rights in the State of Florida. Just 2 days ago, we announced a tremendous victory here in Florida. We want to talk to you about that victory, what it means for everyone who lives, works, visits, goes to school here in Florida. I'm joined with the co-host today, Joe Saunders with Equality Florida. I'm Nadine Smith, Executive Director of Equality Florida. And Joe is not only our senior political director, but a former state rep, a former co-sponsor of legislation, somebody who's been in this fight for wearing different hats for many years. And we are here to celebrate the fact that in the state of Florida, no matter where you live, my hometown up in the Panhandle down to the Keys, if you experience discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, you can file for protection, for justice, just like anybody else through the civil rights statute. So we want to talk about that victory, what it means, how you can access it, how we got here, and what happens next. So again, thanks for joining us. Joe, how you feeling?
Woo! Who can say? What an amazing, amazing week. I mean, I know you and I have been moving through this, through these last 3 days since this news broke, just wide-eyed and passionate. But what an incredible moment for our state, from Pensacola to Fort Myers to Charlotte County to Key West. Our community has won these protections, the protections we've been fighting for since the foundation of Equality Florida. And you know, Nadine, I've been doing the math on my little notepads, and it's something like almost 10 million Floridians just gained access to these protections. Now we know, and we're going to have this conversation today, that we won those protections in June when Bostock made its historic ruling. But for the agency in our state charged through state and federal law to implement these protections, to provide redress to discrimination when it occurs, to so clearly state the news that they have broken this week, it's huge. It's a huge moment for us. It's a huge moment for our state. And now people need to know their rights. They need to know how to access these protections. And that's what the conversation today is going to be about.
So let me just, for those joining right now, just to make sure you understand what has happened. Back in June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a case called Bostock versus Clayton that sex discrimination, any place where sex discrimination exists, that includes protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And the question becomes, now that that's the law of the land, how will it be implemented? And the Florida Commission on Human Relations, the agency that enforces the civil rights law, on January 10th had a meeting. Commissioner Monica Cipro, who is absolutely a champion in this story, introduced, she'd worked with us for a while to figure out exactly how to shape that language. She introduced a motion that passed, and within a couple of weeks, language was added, made public, that demonstrates that the commission will enforce what the Bostock ruling issued as the law of the land. So we are among the early states, not the first, but among the early states, and certainly the largest to fully implement the Bostock ruling. And what that means to you right now is that if you've experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, you can file a complaint and seek justice through the Florida Commission on Human Relations, through the infrastructure that exists. And we're going to talk to you about exactly how you do that. But the first thing we want to do is bring on somebody who has really been an architect of where we are today, has really laid the groundwork for this moment that we are in. Chai Feldblum is an American author and an activist for the disability and LGBT rights community. She's a former law professor at Georgetown University Law Center. She served as commissioner at the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where she was nominated to that position by President Barack Obama in 2009. And in April 2010, she received a recess appointment back to the EEOC, and in December 2010, she was confirmed to serve by the United States Senate. So I would say it this way, because if you read Chai Feldblum's biography, what you're really reading is a history of the LGBT movement. And, so we're thrilled to invite a legend in the movement, one of the leading lights, and she's here to talk about how we got to this day. So please join me in welcoming Chai Feldblum.
Hi, Feldblum. Hi, I just got to say, Nadine was going through your bio, and if I was going to shorthand that, I just would have said movement legal legend. Legal legend of the movement, original drafter of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. I mean, that bio did, we could spend an hour talking about the work that you've done in the movement. And, Nadine, you're exactly right. Chai has been an architect of the jurisprudence that got us to today. Chai Feldblum, how did we get here? How did we get to this moment today in Florida?
Well, no surprise, a lot of people made this happen, right? That's how change happens. You have to have the community really engaged, and then you need some of the right people in the right places, right, to take that energy. So think about this. This law that the Supreme Court interpreted in Bostock just this past year has been around since 1964. Right? It was the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that said you can't discriminate, in that case, private employment, on the basis of race, religion, national origin, and sex. Well, we haven't had people being covered under that law by the courts for all these years, almost 60 years, right? So what happened? Well, you had to go to this agency that I was lucky enough to be a commissioner of, the EEOC. You had to go to that agency first before you could then go to court. And early in the 70s, a transgender woman, we know her name, Paula Grossman, because she ultimately went to court and lost there the way she had lost at the EEOC. Because from her perspective, she's a transgender person. What else but sex has been the reason for her being discriminated against? Right? She comes to the EEOC and that agency says, whatever's going on for you, they literally mentioned like a surgery, whatever's going on, it's not sex. Just said that. And same thing with the gay person who came like about 3 years later. They said sexual orientation has nothing to do with sex. You know how Justice Gorsuch described this in his opinion? He said, it's as if the EEOC and the courts made Title VII into a donut. They just carved out a hole in the middle. They just carved us out. Okay. And the thing is, even though it was legally logical that this would all be based on sex, I like to say that sometimes cultural logic has to change before legal logic catches up. And when I was at the EEOC, I had written an article in 2000 saying, gender identity as well as sexual orientation are forms of sex discrimination. I mean, let's just be logical about that, right? If I am married and I have a picture of my wife, Nancy, on my desk, and I get fired, and my colleague Sam has a picture of his wife, Nancy, on the desk, and he doesn't, has sex been taken into account? Duh. That's the only difference between me and Sam, right? Or if I applied for a job as, well, I won't use my name because no one knows if Chai is male or female, but if I, applied as Charlotte, and then I told them a few weeks before I'm going to be coming and I'm Charles, and they said, you have no more job, what else but sex has been taken into account, right? So it was logical, but it's like the commission, the EEOC, and the courts couldn't see it, right? So when I wrote that article in 2000, I'm like, hey, we should be covered, but we're not.
Well, talk about that piece, that cultural logic having to precede legal logic. What shifts the cultural logic?
Well, the constant argument that had been made in the courts was you can't be covered under Title VII because, look, you're trying to pass another law, to actually include you in those bills I worked on. So it's clearly just got to be different because Congress couldn't have intended that in 1964, right? They just couldn't have intended it. Now, the fact is, in the courts, the way you interpret statutes, it really doesn't matter whether a legislature intended it. It's what are the words they wrote. but courts couldn't imagine that it could be extended. And again, I think it was important that the EEOC was the first entity that reversed its position and said, really, it doesn't matter what Congress intended. Our job as an agency is to apply the law, and this is what the law means. But I don't think people in the agency could have imagined protecting LGBT people if we weren't doing this in 2010, you know, because so many people who had come forward, so many of us who were more out, it was like, yeah, that's not crazy to cover these folks.
Right. Well, you know, when we announced this, part of what we put into the announcement wasn't just that technically what has happened and that the agency that handles civil rights complaints has said our doors are open to you no matter where you are based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We thought it was super important to include that we've gotten to this place because the context has shifted, because we've come out, because we've been visible, because we've pressed for full inclusion, dignity, and respect, that the world in which these decisions get made are different, and our visibility and something that you said in a conversation, you know, it's not just that we want people to use this pathway that is open, but in using it, that's the only way these doors have opened. It's because of people that you were mentioning today, who most people won't remember their names, but they knocked on that door and they pried it open because they were willing to step forward and tell their story. And our hope is that people understand, because of this announcement and because of this forum, you got to step forward. You might be opening the door for somebody else that you may never meet.
And you know what? This is why it's so important, the victory you just got in Florida, because so many people, where they go to might be the state commission. I mean, they could go to the federal commission for some things, you know, like employment, but the state commission is broader. Public accommodations, housing, you know. So before, you would go and you would sort of have to make the case, because let me tell you, so many gay people, LGBT people who were discriminated against in employment, they used to come to the EEOC because they're like, or to the state commissions, because they thought they were covered. They thought it was illegal. And then they got the rude shock. And as you say, Nadine, they had to fight and put themselves out there. Now, at the very least, the law is clear, not only on the federal level, but your state commission has said sex discrimination is sex discrimination, federal law or state law. And you can go now. You'll still have to make your case that it was because you were LGBT that you experienced some discrimination. But if someone's not going to rent to you, if someone's going to kick you out of a restaurant because they didn't like the fact that you just kissed your husband and you were a guy kissing your husband, maybe you were also kicking, but they didn't kick you out for that. You know, go now. I know it's hard sometimes to stand up for your rights, but as you said, Nadine, if you do, that restaurant won't do that to someone else. That rental agency won't do it to someone else.
Well, you know, and you pointed one other thing that I think is so important. You know, we have passed local ordinances, and local partner organizations have passed local ordinances all over the state of Florida. And the process of people stepping up to a microphone in a city council or county commission and saying, this is who I am. I deserve to be treated precisely as you are. You know, my family deserves to be protected precisely as you are. The courage, especially in some of the more conservative parts of the state where people didn't know whether it would pass or whether they would face backlash for doing so, the process of seeking rights is transformational. And the empowerment that people feel when they stand up for themselves is transformational. And in this moment, I think our message and your message is stand up, you know, absorb the fact that these are your rights and you have access to the machinery to protect those rights. And we'll be prepared to fight if we have to, if someone tries to wrest that away from us. But we cannot shrink away or be fearful or skittish at all about exercising those rights.
Yeah. And understand that all that work that was done on the state and local levels, that's part of what has gotten here today. I can tell you that, because it's that type of work that has let at least some people come out, be protected, which then change culture. Okay. Culture and law are synergistic. They affect each other. And that's part of why, I mean, I always love this statement also from the opinion in Bostock, because the dissent was all, oh my God, and you've pulled this elephant from a mouse hole, you know, you're legislating. And Gorsuch says, number one, Title VII is not a mouse hole. It's sort of huge, sex discrimination. And he said, this elephant has never hidden in a mouse hole. It has been standing before us all along. Okay, now we didn't see it, and the culture didn't see it because the culture couldn't absorb that. But Gorsuch is someone who just looks at the words of a statute. He's like, if the federal Congress doesn't like it, they can change the law and say, no, it doesn't include sexual orientation and gender identity. But until then, it does.
So hi, I wanna name, because I'm watching our comment thread. We have tons of folks from not just the state of Florida who are paying attention. I'm seeing Georgia Equality is saying, oh, hey, hello, Equality Florida, and hello to hi. We've got activists from Orlando and South Florida and North Florida who are paying attention, listening to this incredible conversation today. One of the questions I get, we're gonna play to the non-lawyers for a second, if that's okay. Because one of the questions that we've gotten often since this announcement is really anchored in this: how did we get here today? Like, how did we get to the place where 20 years of work, 30 years of work in this state has culminated in these protections? And what I've heard you say is decades of jurisprudence built towards the ruling that we got last year in June in Bostock. But for the non-lawyers here, can you just talk a little bit more about how a Supreme Court ruling, focused on a federal law, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, can interweave and interconnect with our state's civil rights law to lead to this interpretation from the enforcement agency that is the Florida Commission on Human Relations? What is the connection there?
Yeah. So first thing to know is those years of jurisprudence were not constantly coming here. Instead, what you had was an early statement of non-coverage. You had like 40 years of courts, federal courts, not helping us at all. Mm-hmm. So the fact that states and localities were starting to pass these laws and allowing people to come out is what then happened for basically a sea change 10 years ago. So you had nothing going on in the federal courts, except you're not protected. And then 10 years ago, you had a change. You had the agency. This is why agencies are so important, which is why the Florida Commission is so important, setting it out. You had EEOC saying there is coverage. You started having district courts saying that. Then you started having the next level of courts. Well, once that, suddenly the landscape was shook up. The Supreme Court never takes a case. For the non-lawyers, the Supreme Court never takes a case if it looks like the law is settled below. They're not interested. They don't feel they need to step in. Because the legal landscape shifted because of these changes in the courts, suddenly there was what is called in legal language a conflict in the courts. Because now you had some major courts saying, no, Title VII covers this employment. Non-discrimination law covers sexual orientation and gender identity under sex. That's why they took the case. And once they took the case and they really had to just look at the words in the backdrop of this cultural context of all of us being out and proud, they were able to interpret the law. And let me tell you, Justice Alito in dissent went crazy because he said, do you realize what's happening here? I know this is just an employment law, but every federal law that says sex will now cover LGBT people. And he put in an appendix with 200 federal laws that all prohibit discrimination based on sex. Okay, our job right now in Florida and every state, let's run through those laws. Let's let everyone know where they're protected federally. And it's that type of logic that allowed your Florida Commission, led by a champion, and you always need a champion, has now made it clear, okay, when we have sex in a Florida law, a prohibition against sex discrimination, that's what we're doing for our people. Did that help the non-lawyers?
That is fantastic. Thank you. You know what? I appreciate you so much. You have been there even well before today with us, helping us fight those local battles, pass those local ordinances, and bringing that wisdom and that steady vision. We so appreciate you joining us today. We appreciate your time, and we thank you. And I won't hesitate to call you when I need you. All right. You be well.
You've got a great lineup coming up.
Yes, we do.
Thank you, Hyde. Thank you so much.
All right. And I do want to just give a shout out again to the Florida Commission on Human Relations, and particularly to Commissioner Monica Sepero, who really carried the ball for us, and was joined by commissioners in doing so. And Joe, who do we have next on our lineup?
Oh, two faces very familiar to the Equality Florida family. So let's bring to the stage the incomparable Hannah Woolard and John Harris Maurer, Equality Florida's public policy director. Now, some folks may remember Hannah when she was our senior policy director at Equality Florida, but she has ascended. She's going to get mad at me for saying that. In her advocacy and work, Hannah is a campaign strategist who specializes in both legislative advocacy, crafting persuasive messages, and building winning coalitions. She has worked all over the country with Freedom for All Americans, now as their Vice President of Government Affairs, working to create non-discrimination protections in states all across this country. And Hannah, we prepped on one area, but I feel like I'm going to throw one curveball at you, which is to ask you to also talk about the Biden executive order and the impact that that is going to have on agencies and what that could mean for Florida, but really everywhere. But Hannah, in our time with you today, we want to talk about this pathway to protection, the interpretation of Bostock through work with agencies like commissions on human relations. What is happening around the country? Who else has done things like this? And where does the future take us?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, as a former Equality Florida team member, proud queer Floridian, I just want to say congratulations. And I feel so excited to be celebrating this huge moment with you three dear friends and comrades, and with everyone that's watching all across the state and across the country. This is huge, and it's a long time coming. So the Bostock ruling, of course, was a landmark victory for LGBTQ Americans. And I thought I did a great job of course, talking about the details of the ruling. And, Florida's really, I want to just say really clearly, Florida's doing the right thing by implementing the Bostock ruling across all areas of state law. This is a massive step forward for all LGBTQ Floridians and really everyone who cares about fairness and freedom for all. So while Florida is the largest state that has done this so far, Florida's far from alone. And here's what we've seen so far. So 9 states and counting have implemented the Bostock ruling in various ways. So that includes Kansas and North Dakota, who have both also implemented the ruling across all areas of state law, as Florida has done, which would include protections in employment, in housing, and public accommodations. And these have been largely conservative states who are following the direction of a conservative majority Supreme Court, which, to be honest, I know this is something that Equality Florida has been saying for years. This is yet another illustration of what we know to be true, that equality for LGBTQ people is not about partisan politics. It really is about people. And so this has been just yet another illustration of that fact, both at the Supreme Court level and in these state administrative agencies all across the country. So as Hai spoke about too, conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch was crystal clear in his opinion. LGBTQ people are protected from discrimination under existing federal laws that prohibit sex discrimination. So the Florida Commission on Human Relations and these other administrative agencies nationwide, they've reached the logical conclusion that their state laws that include these sex protections also protect LGBTQ people. I love that they're making that clear and explicit by encouraging people who have experienced discrimination to file complaints. And I know that y'all are going to talk about that later. And specifically, most recently, in relation to the Biden executive order, this is another, I think, important example of how these protections become implemented in a bipartisan fashion. So you've got this conservative majority of the Supreme Court. There is this majority opinion that is, again, crystal clear that LGBTQ people are protected under existing federal law. And then we've had the Biden administration issue an executive order implementing that ruling across federal law. So what that executive order did was it directed federal agencies to implement the Bostock ruling where there are prohibitions on sex discrimination. It was basically a policy statement by the Biden administration saying, it is the policy of our administration that federal law should be interpreted to protect LGBTQ people where there are sex protections. So there will be process coming from the Biden administration in terms of these federal agencies taking an inventory, looking at where there are sex protections, providing guidance and perhaps regulations, perhaps promulgating rules. So it's going to take perhaps some time for that to trickle all throughout federal agencies, but they reached, the Biden administration reached the very same logical conclusion that the Florida Commission on Human Relations has now reached, that this should in fact be implemented across as many areas of law as possible so that our community has the very real legal recourse that we need.
So I just want to name, and I've become evangelical about this and about the Biden executive orders. I really appreciate you starting to cover that, Hannah. We've seen presidents before take steps that help to protect LGBTQ Americans from discrimination. We've seen executive orders from the Obama administration, but what was different about what the Biden administration has just done, and we get this question a lot, so I think it's worth putting an underline on and highlighter on, is the Biden administration and its executive order around non-discrimination protections done within the first week of the administration directed all of federal agencies charged with implementing over 200 federal laws that name non-discrimination protections, anywhere from access to credit to fair housing to all of the agencies that govern the United States federal government, to anywhere that sex is named, interpret that by virtue of Bostock to be inclusive of our community. And the impact of that is we're just beginning to see it. We are just beginning to see it, and it's so important, and it bolsters the announcement today. Now, I think Chai would have said these protections, existed even without the Biden executive order. That is the logical conclusion of the Bostock ruling, and it helps. And it helps a great deal that the Biden administration was willing to take that step to direct so clearly that anywhere that sex is listed, that means that our community can also be afforded those protections. Mm-hmm. Well, Hannah, maybe go ahead. You're on mute, I think.
Muted myself to stop any feedback, but you've said something that's so important here. One of the things that we were joking about when the Florida Commission on Human Relations made their decision, it took us a day to take a look at the language, make sure it did what they intended it to do, what we needed it to do. But we were talking about how it's like pushing against a wall or a door for years and years and years, and then the door opens. And that moment before you step into the room is, so we were recognizing it's sort of like, this is here, we're here, right? Mm-hmm. And so we felt it was important to have this town hall because we need people to internalize that these protections exist now. You have access to things that, with absolute clarity, that there is no question that you can move forward with a complaint through the mechanisms for civil rights protections. And in fact, we have, I think what Chai was telling us is you have a responsibility to step forward because your case may open that door like the predecessors did. So thank you, Hannah. Nobody really gets that far away from Equality Florida. Once you're part of the team, we track you and we will find you no matter what you do. But thank you for being one of the people who changed the cultural landscape here in Florida by walking those halls in Tallahassee and having those conversations and changing the context in which this decision got made. And I know you've taken all of those experiences and made that an asset nationally. So thanks again for joining us, and not goodbye, just see you around.
Thank you, Nadine. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, John Harris Maurer, everyone, Equality Florida's Public Policy Director, full-time in Tallahassee, stomping the halls. It's not lost on me that -2 folks, we have the Equality Florida legislative team from its founding. You know, Nadine was our very first lobbyist. Our public policy director, our very first public policy director, Mallory Gardner-Wells, who now lives in Colorado, held that torch. State Representative Carlos Guillermo-Smith held that torch. Hannah, and now, of course, John Harris. You have been working on this for so long, and I know you have a very special guest for us today. That we advertise this town hall as a know your rights moment, and what that really means is that people have access to an agency now to, if they have experienced discrimination, go to for help. And I want to pass the microphone to you to talk a little bit about that and to bring on a very special guest.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Joe. I'm delighted to join that, what I call a rock star roster of folks who've been working on this for so long. It really is a watershed moment for our community. As Chai noted, it's the elephant that's always been there in front of us. But to have this notice put out by the commission and have it be recognized all the more fully is really terrific and so exciting for our community. We are very thankful, as Nadine said, for the work of the Florida Commission on Human Relations and Commissioner Monica Sparrow to bring us this clarity to what has been in front of us for so long, so that, you know, everybody around the state of Florida, whether you live in a blue city or a red city, urban, rural, we all enjoy these same state protections. So the Commission on Human Relations does investigate and resolve complaints of discrimination that we may see in employment, housing, public accommodations. So they're an incredible tool that is available to all Floridians. And I'm very happy to introduce and bring to the stage Dante Bonner, who is a Commission Research Training Specialist and helps, again, all Floridians navigate this process. So Dante is going to help us understand a little bit better, you know, if you are somebody who has faced discrimination, where do you start? How do you start? So again, Dante, we're so thankful that you made the time on some short notice to join us. So thank you for being here. And, you know, if we could just start, really help us understand, if someone in Florida experiences discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, when would they go about contacting the commission?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. This is what the Florida Commission on Human Relations does. We, in addition to investigating discrimination complaints, we're doing educational outreach, and that's part of my responsibility as education outreach training coordinator. So when an individual feels like they have been discriminated against, the first thing they have to do, they have to contact our office. Now, our office, we are located here in Tallahassee, Florida, and we are the only state agency that is charged for investigating discrimination complaints in the areas of employment, housing, certain public accommodations, and state whistleblower retaliation. And it's important to know that this agency only has the authority to investigate federal and state law in those specific areas. We do not encompass all specific aspects. So, but when a person feels like they've been discriminated against, they would have to notify us in writing. We have certain mechanisms in place. We have a website, fchr.myflorida.com. And if you go to our website, you have the opportunity to fill out what we call a technical assistance questionnaire form. And it's an online form that individuals can fill out and explain basically, why do you feel like you've been discriminated against? And if you feel like you've been discriminated against one or more protected bases, which would include sex, national origin, religion, disability. It's not a matter of it's only one issue. It could be all issues or many issues. You would fill out that questionnaire form, and then that form is then electronically sent to us. So that's one of the first ways that you can do that. Another way is you can actually just write to us. If you don't have computer access, we can receive those information, that complaint in writing. Basically having a narrative explaining what's going on in your particular issue or complaint. Another way is attorneys. If you have an attorney that is representing your interests, we do have a specific form that an attorney can reach out to our office, fill out that charge form with the same information, making allegations, and send it into our charge to our office. So when we receive the offices, we receive every complaint and we do the same thing for every case. First of all, we determine whether or not we even have the authority to even investigate the complaint. And we look at it just as far as what is the entity that is being alleged? When was the time frame occurred? We need persons to know that regardless of whatever your basis is, you must file your discrimination complaint within 365 days of the date of harm. And if it does not meet that requirement, we do not have the authority to investigate the complaint. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that nothing can be done. It's saying that this specific agency cannot move forward with that. And that's for all aspects of the complaint, 365 days. Now, once we receive that complaint, our state statute states that we investigate our complaints within 180 days from when we receive the filing date for that process. And so that's how we get the ball rolling. I know a lot of times we receive a lot of phone calls asking questions about how do we file the complaint, and we're more than happy to explain the process, but we cannot take complaints over the phone. And the reason why we don't is we want to make sure that information is not left out. We understand that a traumatic experience has happened to you and you're upset, you're concerned, you're worried, you're confused. And so taking information over the phone, sometimes you'll leave out stuff or something that you may feel that's important. So that's one of the reasons why we don't take the complaints over the phone. They can be sent to us in writing. That's the best way to do that. We do receive them over our email, and we do receive fax as well. Now, of course, because of the pandemic, our offices are closed to visitors, but when the office does reopen, persons can walk in and drop off the complaints. Now, when we receive those complaints, because we are a neutral fact-finding agency, we do not have the ability to give guidance in terms of what you should do. These are what you shouldn't do. What we tell you is, here is our process, here is our procedures. And we always encourage individuals, if you feel like a complaint has been done, it does not hurt you to submit the complaint in to take a look at it. And once it's received, it is then assigned to an investigator. And so they investigate the merits of were the actions taken against you based upon the protected basis that you have alleged.
Dante, a question we've just gotten in the chat, which I think is a really good one. It's coming from Michelle Ott from Gainesville, is I'm going to distill Michelle's question a little bit, but what's the relationship between the Florida Commission on Human Relations and local human rights boards that may, through local ordinance, have established pathways for addressing discrimination? How do those two things work together?
Well, because we are governed by state law, the local ordinances, the local boards and the state boards don't really have a direct relationship. So if you're filing a complaint based upon your local ordinances, that does not have an effect on here at the Florida Commission. Now, we have a relationship with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, also known as the EEOC, where under Title VII of Civil Rights Act of 1964, we're able to investigate complaints under the federal law as well as our state law, which is Florida Statute Chapter 760. So when this agency investigates the complaint, we're investigating it under those two authority towards them guidelines. The local ordinances don't have an effect on what we are investigating. So they're really two different cases. So if an individual is filing a complaint with their local ordinances, it's not covered by our agency. It would need to be filed with us.
Got it. So
Yeah,
really, maybe go ahead, Dante.
Oh, just a really important point that Dante is touching on. I mean, fortunately, we do know that 60% of Floridians have additional protections that have been codified at the city and county level across Florida. Those are, again, in addition to what the commission has recognized. And it may be that you have recourse available under multiple statutes or multiple sets of protections. So obviously what we're talking about here today is not legal advice. It may be very important for folks to talk to an attorney to figure out, where you should be bringing those claims, There can be different scope of coverage, as Dante mentioned. There may be different timeframes about when you're allowed to bring something. So those differences can be really important. Certainly, if you do reach out to the commission, I'm sure Dante and others can help you figure out if it is something that the commission handles. You're also welcome to use the reporting discrimination tool that Equality Florida has on its website. That will connect you with legal resources that can help you figure out your next steps there and think about, again, what is the best way to consider and potentially pursue a claim. So we're happy to be a resource there. I'm sure we can get the link to that discrimination reporting tool put up in the chat for folks to access.
And John Harris,
to add on to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
To add on what John said was, when we take complaints, and that's one of the things that we look at, do we have the authority to investigate? For example, by law, we cannot investigate any businesses that have less than 15 employees. So if we receive a complaint, even though it may be an actionable action, but because a business or entity has less than 15 employees, we don't have the authority to investigate. However, your city or local ordinance may have basically, if it has a minimum of 8 employees or 5 employees, then your complaint would have to be addressed in that particular venue. So that's some of the examples as far as, do we have the authority to even investigate the complaint? Mm-hmm. And there was another point I wanted to ask.
That was exactly where I was going, so good job.
Another point I would like to add is, a lot of times when discrimination takes place, most of the time you're not by yourself. And what will happen is we receive complaints coming in at one time. And at the agency, what we have to really stress is each person must file their own complaint. So even if you're in a group and you cannot file a group complaint or class action, that's not what the Florida Commission does. So if 5 of you are going into a particular place of business and you feel like you've suffered discrimination, all 5 of you has to file an individual complaint, because we have to look through the ends of what happened to you as a specific individual. Because it is quite possible that of the 5 of you that allege discrimination, only 3 of you may have actually suffered this discrimination and the other 2 did not. So we don't look at it from a all-encompassing perspective. We look at each individual complaint through our process.
Very important point. Thank you.
Well, Dante,
I
think one last question for you, Dante. So I cannot thank you enough for coming to be here today. You know, we have been partners to the Florida Commission on Human Relations since its founding and since our founding, and we want to continue to be a partner. You know, almost 10 million Floridians now live in places that did not have this explicit protection before, and now have access to it. And so that means there's a ton of work to do to educate our community about how to access the commission. Can you talk a little bit about that? How does the commission partner with organizations in the community to make sure that people know their rights and that they have access to this machinery?
Well, that's kind of what my job is. We are for making sure the citizens of Florida understand what their rights are. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, it's kind of changed the way how we're trying to reach out to have individuals. Of course, we have our website that explains what we cover and what are the rights that citizens have. But persons can always contact our office to talk to see how we can partner to make sure that what are the needs of that organization to express. We can do that. Also, we also do presentations. We're doing it now through Zoom and through webinars and things of that sort, just to get the word of like, hey, first of all, we are here, and here are your rights, and this is how you can locate to us. And we always tell the individuals, we're not advocates, but we are responsible for making sure if you have an allegation that it is seen through, making sure that did or did not discrimination take place. And you won't know unless you actually go through the process. One final thing I must say is to your point, we have to receive named complaints. We cannot build anonymous complaints. And I know some individuals are maybe a little leery or concerned about what's going to happen to them. And we deal with them in the real work. We are very empathetic about the work system, about the social system, but we have to have a name with the individual. So we cannot receive anonymous complaints because just because if you don't name a name, that may not be the individual. So I do want to encourage persons, to do that. But anytime any organization wants to partner with us to talk to them, I would be the general person or anyone on my staff. So we welcome opportunity to educate the citizens of Florida. Again, we're not just an investigative agency. We are an educational resource. We want to make sure that we are accessible to all Floridians.
Dante, thank you so much for that. And as Joe said, we've partnered in the past. We were part of putting together a hate crimes and stopping hate violence educational forum years and years ago.
I recall that.
Yes.
I've been with the agency quite a long time.
Right. So, and it was in the wake of Ryan Skipper's murder in Polk County, and his parents were keynote speakers that year. And we want to do more of that. In addition to Equality Florida, there's a coalition of businesses that have been championing this for years and years. Florida Competes. I dropped into the chat some of the quotes from major employers in our state, from AT&T, from Florida Blue, from the Florida Chamber of Commerce President Mark Wilson. Their argument has been not only is it the right thing to do, but if Florida's going to be competitive and draw the best and brightest and keep them here, it has to be a place where you get a fair shot at things, where the deck isn't stacked against you based on prejudice. And so I'm thinking about ways that some of those same businesses that have been shoulder to shoulder with us fighting for this can help to amplify the work that you are doing, help amplify that message. So we'll definitely be following up with you. And one other point, I believe it's the law, and you can correct me, that when you file a complaint, it can't be anonymous, but it is confidential through the process. Somebody can't just do a public records request in the midst of an investigation and ask for all of that information.
Yeah, that is correct. Confidentiality is very important with our agency. Only persons that have actually filed the complaint or is the recipient of the complaint has access to that information. Even if we receive media requests, we have to handle that very carefully because, again, it is confidential information. So while the investigation is going on, if you are witness to an investigation, your information is not released. Your name is not released during the scope of the investigation. Once the investigation is closed, the attorneys that represent the complainant or the respondent or the complainant themselves or the company themselves only have the right to retain a copy of the actual full file of the investigation. So the general public cannot get that information.
Right. Dante, thank you. We're going to be seeing a lot of each other.
I'm very familiar.
Jerseys, but we appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to working with you in the future. You take care.
My pleasure. You take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dante. Well,
yeah,
y'all.
I think we covered it. I did want to do one more shout out because this really is the culmination of so much work. And Chai is so correct when she says that these aren't just legal victories; these are cultural victories. And John Harris, thank you so much for joining as well and bringing Dante in and bringing the perspective. Thanks for all your work in those hallways. Certainly the fight isn't over, but we all need to take a moment to enjoy thoroughly this total victory. So
absolutely, a pleasure to celebrate with y'all.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. But I think we can't say it often enough. We are here because ordinary people all across this country, all across our state, step forward to tell their story, to be out, to challenge spaces where our presence was contested, and significantly to step up into the court system, into defending themselves, even when there was no clarity that they could prevail. And I want to shout out to all of the organizations across the country and here in Florida, SAVE, the Palm Beach Human Rights Council, the Jacksonville Equality Coalition, the Human Rights Council of North Florida, Ad
Our
Hoc.
partners at SAVE.
Yeah,
Our partners here in Miami at SAVE. Yep.
yeah, just all across the state. Some organizations that arose just for the purpose of passing an ordinance or fighting a battle locally. Everyone who's come to the Capitol, lobbied, made your phone call, signed the petition, all of this adds up to these tipping point moments for our community. So in celebrating this, we are saluting the great work of local partners, of our national allies, and most importantly, of the volunteers and the folks who make it possible for us to do this work. So our work isn't done, but we can take a breath and we can celebrate together. And Equality Florida is here for you if you need to file a complaint, if you need any assistance in accessing that system, but understand that you have a right to be treated with fairness and dignity in the state of Florida, and you have a right to access the mechanisms of civil rights protections if you are not. And with that, we bid you a wonderful afternoon, a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Happy Friday.